First of all, thank you, Randy and Florian, for having me here. And I think I'm very glad to see some familiar faces from last year. So at least we can meet virtually. It's a great thing. And the last sentence, love is all that counts, is the perfect bridge to what I'm going to talk now. So I begin with a first slide moment. It doesn't. Okay. Yes. So let us begin by reading some passages of Spencer Brown's Only Two Can Play This Game, because they are the perfect introduction to what I'm going to talk about. He says, the person who really fits you is always recognizable, but may take time to find. The status that such a person, sorry, I cannot see my own screen. Yes, now, yes, I see it. The person who really, I begin again. The person who really fits you is always recognizable, but may take time to find. The status that such a person confers upon you is the status of who you really are. Only you know this, but until you meet the right person, you may not be fully conscious of it. The next one. When you go to paradise with your partner, your new inner self is immediately fitted into and accommodated by the equally egoless self of the other, where it sustains nourishment, protection, and the revitalizing communion with its own image mate. The next one. The meaning of marriage is that two people become so addicted to each other that they cannot live happily or even live at all apart. The addiction, each equally for the other, is their total security, and each renews and redoubles the strength of the other through an ecstatic exchange of benefits as long as they both live. Last one. There is a complete ranging of your two original responsive and responsible selves. The range of your whole being, your real being, your two ranges respond. Somehow, miraculously, your bumps fit her indentations and hers yours over the whole range of your joint responsive scale, resulting in a massive coming alive of your whole potentiality, both jointly and separately. Sorry, okay. So, Spencer Brown's description of the experience of love emphasizes the partner's communion in feeling, their perfect fitting, their absence of selfishness, their mutual responsibility in the pursuit of a shared happiness, all of which features enable the partners to fully realize their potentialities and benefit from their mutual exchange. These features are no other than those that define the semantic context of the word love, in terms of Plato's and Aristotle's Erôs and Philia. While Philia is commonly translated as friendship, Eros is characterized as a desire that is felt towards what is loved. Plato's Symposium and Phaedrus offer the best account of Eros insofar as it involves not only relationships based on intimacy, affection, and sexuality, but philia as well. However, the fullest discussion of philia is provided by books 7 and 9 of Aristotle Nicomachean Ethics. Both of these terms are present in Husserl's Ethics, from love as a primal instinct or drive, ensuring self-preservation, to love in the context of a rational faith in God. Embracing this quest is first and foremost an act of love, and as in Plato's and Aristotle's Ethics, it is a love for the pursuit of happiness. In this connection, my aim is to disclose the ethical role played by Philia and Eros in the accounts of Plato, Aristotle, and Husserl, and their relevance as to the constitution of a moral self. Our reflections start by an insight into the nature of virtue. Virtue is fundamentally based on the affective attachment to the other. Love, as both Plato and Husserl claim, is a feeling that permeates in our most primitive drives, grounding not only the value of life's preservation, but also higher order ethical values. The last step of this foundational order is the understanding that friendship and love are not sporadic emotions, but are emotional states involving choice and reason that form the basis of a shared life in search of happiness and beauty. My contention is that these experiences and actions allow for the constitution of the moral self. Self-awareness as moral agent is impossible without the other self. Our commitment to others is the source of our personal self-constitution as virtuous subjects. Love is thus primarily a self-appraising emotion. However, while disinterested love is the basis of virtue, reciprocal love is the primary source of shared eudaimonism at the communitarian level, and of self-constitution and self-awareness as moral agents at the individual level. In conclusion, Erôs and Philia not only permeate our choices and actions, but fundamentally allow for our personal self-constitution and self-awareness as moral persons. Comments by an introduction. The Greek term arete encompasses excellence and virtue and oscillates between the morally commendable and the personally recommendable. Aristotle describes virtue in rhetoric as a faculty of providing and preserving good things, or a faculty of conferring many great benefits and benefits of all kinds on all occasions. Aristotle presents a similar list of goods which are deemed to ensure independence of life, self-sufficiency, autarkeia, and security as phaleia. He distinguishes, however, a narrower sense of virtue, restricting virtues to praiseworthy states of character. Among them he lists justice, courage, temperance, magnificence, magnanimity, liberality, gentleness, prudence, promises, wisdom, Sophia. Accordingly, the virtues, so Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics, are defined as a state of character in virtue of which we stand well or badly with reference to the passion. Virtues are a hexis, that is, a state of character that manifests itself in choice or preference, a hexis for hierarchy. It is a disposition or habit to act in accordance with the conception of happiness. In the wake of Plato, Aristotle claims that these rational desires are directed at the good, to agathon, which for him is equivalent to happiness. Aristotle defines virtues as dispositions to feel and act according to the deliberate desire, bouleusis. Hence, the subject must have knowledge and he must choose, so that correct judgment and correct feelings are required. A choice is appropriate when we hit the mean. I quote, excellence then is a state concerned with choice, lying in a mean relative to us, this being determined by reason and in the way in which the man of practical wisdom would determine it. Unquote. The doctrine of the mean is a major achievement in the reflective study of human conduct, since it is essential to determine the moral goodness of a subject. Virtue combines thus the excellence of character and of practical reason. Aristotle sustains, in contrast to Plato, the sufficiency thesis. Eudaimonia is thus the activity of the soul in accordance with the best and most noble virtue. For Plato, the demand for a single account of virtue is controversial, although he concedes that different types of virtue have some common character which makes them virtuous. To recognize this feature is to recognize a general nature, that is, that virtues share a universal katahulu attribute, a universal attribute. Virtue is thus a meaningful predicate of many types of virtues, of temperance and justice, for example, and cannot be reduced to a single definition, in contrast to Aristotle. Neither can it be reduced to a behavioral tendency, since motivation plays a decisive role in people's action. Hence, the recognition of what is good is a state of the soul that motivates virtuous actions. A conception of someone's good develops through deliberative reasoning, since the rational part of the soul deliberates about the better and the worse, and about the good of the whole soul and the body. Hence, the recognition of what is truly good is the ultimate end of our striving. In his view, virtuous people make the right and wise decisions and take rational actions in order to promote their own happiness. This rational eudaimonism supports a comparative thesis, sustaining that virtue contributes the most to happiness, but does not support the sufficiency thesis endorsed by Aristotle, that is, that virtue is sufficient to happiness. For Plato, happiness and a flourishing human life are the result of the exercise of virtues. Only a virtuous disposition allows access to the actions conducive to happiness, that is, to ethical duties. While Plato's ethical theory is representative of the so-called virtue ethics, Aristotle's ethics belongs to the teleological type, since the ultimate telos for Aristotle is human happiness, eudaimonia. Therefore, in Plato's dialogues, in contrast to Aristotle's ethical writings, the discussion often settles on one particular virtue, since virtues are understood as soul dispositions and are determined out of the understanding of what makes a person good. The Husserlian phenomenological tradition, in contrast, is basically axiological in character, although it assumes the feature of a teleological ethics in the Aristotelian sense in its later period. Starting from a deontological conception that is based on duties, moral duties, Husserl ultimately develops a theory of values, an axiology, that is tied to our valuing being a good person and leading the best possible life. Plato, Aristotle, and Husserl, unlike Kant, are not concerned with the perspective of a rational agent in general, but only with human excellence and goodness as comprising both emotional as well as rational capacities that are expressed in feeling and action. Come to Plato, love as Eros. Plato's work on love in Symposium and Phaedrus is centered on the concept of Eros. Diotima's ascent in the scheme of a Symposium is undeniably central. It is a work about passionate erotic love, about sexual and intellectual passion for a particular individual. Diotima's teaching that love in any of its manifestations is directed towards the good. What we love is the good and nothing but the good. Quotation, love longs for the good, challenges the profane conception of love in the name of true sacred goodness. The connection between both Eros and God is provided by beauty. Love is not simply love of beauty, but the generation of beauty, both in body and soul, since every lover seeks the birth of love, that love it is of beauty. Diotima draws on the assumption that as sexual beings we are responsive to beauty, and then the outcome of sorry, I lost my place. The Trima draws on the assumption that as sexual beings, we are responsible to beauty. Responsive to beauty, and that the outcome of the responsiveness is the production of a new generation and of discourse in the education of a younger person, both being aroused by some perceived beauty in that person's body and soul. It is that this development, if we look at the tale itself, departs from a tale told by Aristophanes that makes of love a search for primordial wholeness. Each of us being as if a half-Charlie cat from a two-headed ancestor and longing to find out our other half. Bodily beauty and beauty of character give birth to fine discourse about civic virtue, justice, and moderation, with a view to education. The final step of the ascent leads to the single knowledge of the beautiful, towards which the philosopher has toiled so long for. The summit is the beautiful itself, an everlasting loveliness that gives birth to true and not the seeming, that is an image of virtue. During this teleological process, the emotive force of beauty, coupled with the intentionality of love, subsume in this ascent first the lower forms of love, sexual desire, and beauty, beauty of the body, then the love of learning and institutions, to finally engender true excellence, surprisingly not the good itself. If love leads to virtue, it is precisely both because true virtues are determined by wisdom or phronesis, and because love is guided by reason. Love is therefore not only a passion, but a cognitive function of our soul, insofar as it leads the dialectician to the intellectual contemplation of the idea of beauty. Different forms of beauty participate in beauty itself, the transcendent reality of the beauty of the soul. Hence, Socrates does not despise physical beauty, but integrates it to an order or foundation that is composed by an ascent of ontological levels, where each stage of the ladder incorporates the lower one without obliterating it. Love is, as such, has an integrating or synthesizing nature that mediates between ontological levels. The Phaedrus displays a new role of feelings and emotions, and particularly love in the good life. Here, erotic relationships of long duration between particular individuals are considered to be fundamental to happiness. Philosophy itself is viewed as a form of madness and mania, in which intellect is guided by personal love toward a discovery of a self, which loved and beloved have yet to make their fully own. The Phaedrus' main contribution to the analysis of Symposium is, in my view, the phenomenological description of a process of self-reflection that, driven by the intentionality of Eros, is fulfilled by self-knowledge, not in the sense of episteme, but rather of understanding oneself. Knowledge of what one lacks, knowledge of oneself as a self-moved soul and character, knowledge of conforming a larger whole, knowledge as an awareness of falling short of the ideal. Most importantly, however, it involves awareness of oneself as a moral self, which is responsible not only for the own, but for the beloved process of integration of psychic harmony with philosophical ideas. Phaedrus departs from a description of how it feels to fall in love and why this feeling awakens the aspiration to a philosophical life. It describes the highest rank of life as that of a seeker after wisdom or beauty, a follower of the muses and a lover. A life of a soul who has sought after wisdom unfeignedly, or has conjoined his passion for a loved one with that seeking. Plato offers us an allegorical portrait of a charioteer with a team of two horses, while the well-behaved white horse seeks honor and propriety. The violent black horse represents sexual need. The tension is resolved by the acknowledgement that it is only at the level of the whole person that the lover will be blessed with happiness and concord, have won self-mastery and inward peace, and live a wisdom-loving life. After the encomium to the memory of things past, Socrates turns to the function of beauty and the gods in the context of Eros. He begins the middle section of the palinode by the side of a godlike face or bodily form that truly expresses beauty, through which his mind recollects beauty itself. Love, therefore, here is the condition of reminiscence of both physical and ideal beauty. Beauty is a value bound up with sensory experience. Beauty connects the sense of eidos or idea to the sense of the faculty of sight. That is, connects sensory experience to intelligible ideas. Thanks to this connection, the initial surrendering to pleasure can be transformed into a kind of reverence or awe and lead to a relationship of philosophic love. When the soul in question is Zeus-like, reason can have a motivational force that controls sexual desire. We may think that the individual, in the uniqueness and integrity of his or her individuality, will never be the object of love, but Symposium makes clear that the individual is loved as a unique and irreplaceable whole, while Phaedrus focuses on the joint development of a loving couple over the course of a lifetime, guided by an older rule of the philosophical mind, such that the lovers will live for love in singleness of purpose with the aid of philosophical discourse. The lover's search for himself must take place through both the divinization and the patterning of the beloved, guided by Eros, self-reflection, and most importantly, reason, which restrains the excesses of passion. It is no selfish love insofar as the lover helps the beloved to develop his potential nature and to love himself qua whole. Therefore, the lover's well-being and self-knowledge is tied to the beloved. It is a process of conjoint growth where the self-awareness of myself as the agent that contributes to the other's fulfillment is inseparably tied to my own self-development. Reciprocity in love defines thus a structure of care that is essential to intersubjective harmonious relationships. Come to Aristotle, LoF as Philia. Philia are the very strongest affective relationships that human beings form. Friends are most necessary with a view to living. Aristotle defines friendship, philia, as a mutually acknowledged and reciprocal affection that exists between separate individuals who mutually respect and share an interest in each other on the basis of virtue, that is, wish the other well for their own sake, pleasure, or utility. To be friends, they must be recognized as bearing goodwill and wishing well to each other. Aristotle concludes, goodwill seems, then, to be a beginning of friendship, as the pleasure of the eye is the beginning of love. As acted in Symposium, we are first struck by a beautiful body as a source of pleasure. Aristotle distinguishes three types of friends. There are some that are loved for the sake of pleasure and some others that are useful as tools. Such friendships, however, tend to break up easily. Finally, there are others that, being alike in excellence, that is, in virtue, are necessary and intrinsic parts of happiness. Philia forms the basis for a shared life, that is, when they live together, spend their time together, delight in each other, and interchange words and deeds. Moreover, the good man needs friends insofar as happiness is essentially a shared good. The effectiveness of philia is a product of joint action. They are thought to become better too by their activities and by improving each other. Quote, for from each other they take the mold of the characteristics they approve. When the saying, noble deeds from noble men, as the saying says, noble deeds come from noble men. Aristotle, as Plato did before, emphasizes that the pair is conjointly responsible for its development. As such, love is instrumental for self-development. However, Aristotle's approach is less self-involved than Plato's, inasmuch as he is careful to emphasize the need both for reciprocity in feelings, thought, and deed, and for mutual harmonization of character, which in conjunction ultimately leads to the formation of social and affective bonds. Among these bonds, he includes not only voluntary associations, but also the non-chosen relations that exist among family members and citizens. Political friendship is the paradigmatic case of love of character, since such friends need not be perfectly virtuous agents. Hence, friends are not only instrumental to happiness, as each subject owes both their actions and their nobility to the other, but an intrinsic part of it. Eudaimonia is a self-sufficient good, something that is pursued for its own sake. Achieving this state requires excellent activity in accordance with the rational principle. But since perception or understanding is characteristic of the human life, and the friend is another self or another alter ego, the consciousness of a friend's life would be a kind of self-consciousness. Aristotle says the happy man needs to be conscious of the existence of his friend as well. In addition, to live requires self-perception and self-awareness of it. Both, if we perceive that we perceive, and if we think that we think. That is, a virtuous man requires friends not only for the sake of self-consciousness, but also to perceive his own goodness, and to be conscious of the existence of his friends, and of sharing and discussion in thought, for these entails an awareness of one's own excellence. A good life requires reciprocity not only in virtuous actions, but in the awareness of the other as duplicating one's own excellence and as responding to it. In summary, self-awareness of moral agents is impossible without this other self. In conclusion, love is not simply a feeling, philethys, it is rather a state of character, philia, a disposition, hexis, involving choice for hybris. As in Plato, love is not a sporadic emotion, but an emotional state involving choice and reason. Activity for the sake of nobility constitutes the first best sort of happiness, which is achieved through virtuous actions aiming principally at friends. But the expression of virtuousness through friendship is not a matter of love exclusively, since it must be harmonized with other ends in good life and more broadly with the general choices we make. This does not mean, however, that the moral end or the nobility of goodness is subordinate to intellectual values, as Plato claims. Accordingly, if a considered self-judgment about what is best in its situation requires both emotional dispositions and rational judgment, and if attachment is essential to the expression of a virtuous disposition, we can conclude that love as friendship involves both emotional as well as rational capacities. This means that our emotional evaluations have to comply with three requirements in order to become virtuous dispositions. First, that of the correctness of the cognitive content of the pursued ends, that is, the apprehension of the relevant feature. Second, the correctness of our feelings, that is, the judgment about the appropriateness of our affective response. And third, and most fundamentally, the correctness of our reasons, that is, the identification of the motives for our actions. Hence, activity for the sake of nobility constitutes the best sort of happiness, which is achieved through virtuous actions aiming, as I said, principally at friends. Love, like any other virtuous emotional disposition, is a rationally informed and affectively guided intentional state that is voluntarily chosen for the sake of happiness. Moreover, friendship grants us self-perception and self-awareness by combining altruistic and self-assertive features. Friendship is thus intrinsic and necessary not only to happiness, but also to the constitution of an individual's self. Coming to my last point, Husserl's ethics. The teleology of love. Aristotle's concern with right feelings is taken up in Husserl's account of intentional feelings and emotions, which latter also addresses the motivations and justifications of feelings and actions in a moral sense. Love, as both Plato and Husserl claim, is a feeling that permeates our most primitive tribes, grounding not only the value of life's preservation, but also higher order ethical values. For Husserl, friendship and love are not sporadic emotions, but emotional states involving choice and reason, as Aristotle has, that form the basis of a shared life in search of happiness and beauty. As Aristotle did. In fact, in agreement with Aristotle, I wanted to say, in fact, Husserl maintains the evident absolute validity of the categorical imperative in the sphere of willing, a principle which Husserl takes from Brentano and says, do the best that is attainable. This imperative and noetic expression is to be made into a law of the subject's willing. A certain value is thereby acknowledged as the best on the basis of a correctly motivated and maximally evident will, as Aristotle's conception of fullest demands. In the wake of Plato and Aristotle, Husserl emphasizes that the imperative allows for inclination and preference, insofar as what we ought to choose is founded on value, a value determined not by our intellective consciousness, but by our emotive or feeling consciousness. Hence, Husserl's sexuality is, contrary to Kant's, a logic of the heart, Gemüt, based on the relation of the heart to what appears as good and bad. The personal I decides to rule and shape its life according to the categorical imperative. Here, a thought central to Husserl's ethics emerges, namely, the Aristotelian notion of a rational self-regulation of the whole of life based on the recognition of what is truly good, a notion that determines my own identity as an ethical subject. In the Freiburg lecture of 1919-20, Introduction to Philosophy, and in writings on ethics of the same period, Husserl realizes that the objective value has to be distinguished from the same value as an individual subjective value of love. This problem of love, which is one of the main problems of phenomenology, says Husserl, leads him to question the validity of the categorical imperative, insofar as love, as something specifically personal, may not coincide with the absolute ought that consists in leading a purposeful and active life guided by truth, reason, and rightness, and in accordance with our best possible capacities and conscience. The personal values of love, such as individual values, that is, for example, the love for individual persons, thus also make up the biggest part of the values of an absolute ought. Love is therefore more than a feeling, since it involves choice. In case of conflict between them, the absolute values of love have priority over objective values, for to go against the former one would amount to a self-betrayal. In case where we have to choose, the only option is to sacrifice one value for the sake of another. Husserl takes up these issues in his later writings on the ontology of spiritual or of personal life, developed in his Kaizo articles entitled Renewal from the early 1920s and related ones published in Husserliana 27 and Husserliana 37 respectively. He does not renounce his former axiological ethics, but rather grounds it on an affective structure, the subjective values of love. Husserl emphasizes that personal life is determined by pre-egoical striving tendencies, which express themselves in knowledge and tension as a striving for clarity and wholeness, and which are articulated in actions of will that aim at obtaining what is desired. The ultimate end of this ideal life form is a state of fulfilled happiness, glückseligkeit, that is, of eudaimonia in an Aristotelian sense. The task of ethics study, is to unveil the aims of our striving and find the means to realize them. Ethics, as Husserl always wanted to be a theory and a practical discipline of the perfect human life, and of being a man, a theory and a practical discipline of the method of self-shaping of the subject and its life towards perfection and happiness. Much in Aristotelian terms, Husserl defines happiness as a blessed total life, consistent life, which in all its intentions and all its striving, would run permanently in the form of pure fulfillment. Such a state is not achievable for human beings, since our life is characterized by the fortuitousness of actual life that may inhibit a life in its seeking, genuine unanimity and satisfaction. Experiences such as blind passion, habits, contingencies, foreign coercion, motivate a critique that affects the sphere of our aims, that is, the sphere of praxis and will. In this connection, Husserl claims that the values of the person or values of love are the highest values. Feelings, and particularly love, ground the constitution of all values in the law for the realization of the values of the person. They encompass both individual personal values that are centered in self-love, self-liebe, and social personal values, personale werte, that concern the love of neighbor, Nächstenliebe. Self-love as self-contentment with Selbstzufriedenheit is not divorced from social personal values, that is, for example, the love for individual persons as for one's own child or for a friend, for personality of a higher order, such as one's own family or community, or love of one's neighbor. On the contrary, much in accordance with Plato and Aristotle, Husserl claims that while values tending toward our own self-realization endow our egoistical striving with a force that altruistic striving initially lacks, social values make up the biggest part of the values of an absolute thought. In this vein, Husserl invokes the religious law of love. You shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. This imperative claims that whenever the other is given to me in empathy, I have to sympathize with him and love him, because fostering him is my absolute ought. Here, love is understood in the Christian sense of agape, and not in the sense of Erôs or Philia, which are addressed to particular individuals that are chosen for the beauty of body and of spirit. As in Plato, the teleological striving of love departs from sensory love, then opens to spiritual love, which exceeds the individual sphere, and finally embraces the reality of all human beings. The universal community of love leads back to its origin in the instinct of objectivation of the passive sphere. The strive for a community is addressed to the satisfactory life in and with others, a life in community with them, in protection against common necessity. This last mode includes an instinct of love, generative love, and a primal form, form of love of the neighbor, and aims at the constitution of a communalized self-preservation comprising also self-responsibility and self-norming. Self-contentment and happiness, which are essentially tied to a loving care or solicitude for others, are the final stages in this teleological development, whose telos is eudaimonia in Aristotelian terms. This Platonic Aristotelian essence is crowned by a rational faith, Vernunftglauben, in a divine order, world order that can counterbalance the effects of the irrationalities and contingencies of our life. Faith, the Husserl, is the absolute and higher requirement, but it is posited on the motivation of the heart. The world has to be a lovely and good. For the sake of eudaimonia, we need to affirm life. The higher morality is the discourse of the truth of the will of the absolute all, that can be known by the criteria of loving someone or something, for the sake of itself. This requires, however, the ultimate support of loving faith.
And I'm just going to give you a 5-minute warning now.
Yes, this is the conclusion, the last one. It's a half a page. Husserl's late ethical theory combines the assumption of absolute ethical laws and rational values with the demand for a phenomenological analysis of our emotive and feeling consciousness, reconciling rationality with affectivity through the order of foundation. Such emotional experiences do not ground in objectifying acts of an intellective reason. On the contrary, they are themselves objectifying and value-positing acts that must, however, comply with the demands of practical reason. Much in Platonic Aristotelian terms, the criterion for rational justification and evaluation arises from an affective demand. Logical or theoretical consciousness has its foundation in affective consciousness, more precisely in love. These experiences and actions allow not only for knowledge of oneself, but also for the constitution of the moral self. As I said in the beginning, a self-awareness of moral agent is impossible without the other self. Friends and love for others are required for the constitution of self-consciousness and self-perception, insofar as it is through love that we become not only conscious of a friend's life and of our shared feelings and actions, but of our own excellence as well, as Plato and Aristotle have shown. One's own awareness of moral agents is dependent on the awareness of the other as duplicated one's own excellence. One's own awareness of moral agents is dependent on the awareness of the other. So, love is thus primarily a self-appraising emotion. This means that while intentional feelings like pleasure or displeasure ground our pre-reflective self-awareness, love as a stable emotion is the source of our reflective awareness of moral persons. Insofar as it allows for personal self-constitution, love fulfills a transcendental function. In conclusion, love requires reciprocity in actions and feelings. This means love as an activity of the self requires to be embedded in the communitarian search for a good life, wherein what is good for others becomes part of my individual life horizon. Hence, while disinterested love is the basis of virtue, reciprocal love is the primary source of shared eudaimonism at the communitarian level and of a self-constitution and self-awareness of moral agents at the individual level. In conclusion, Erôs and Philia not only permeate our choices and actions, but fundamentally allow for our personal self-constitution and self-awareness as moral agents. Hence, excellence of character and intellectual excellence can be discerned in our commitment to love of reason and of others, but this requires that they be constituted in common and responsible action within a community on the basis of mutual friendship and love. So, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Irene. Is this working? No. Okay. Thank you, Irene. So we have some time for some questions now. And actually, one here I can begin us if people are pondering now. So I didn't see the presence of this other partner of Eros, one of the erotes in the mythology, and brought up by Plato and Aristotle as well at certain points, anteros, right? I always think of Eros and anteros, like anti-Eros, right? As formally these partners, that are an important distinction, right? Eros, sometimes called anteros is like counter love, or the receiving end, right? And Eros is like the giving, perhaps. I mean, I don't know. What are your thoughts about this? I feel like this particular distinction between eros and anteros in the ancient literature and mythology, is an important formal distinction in considering the nature of love and the dynamics of the tension that love and desire, and ultimately love and desire for the truth and for beauty and for good, right? The good. So I don't know. What do you think about those sorts of things in this kind of formal context?
Just I have to ask you, what do you mean by anti-eros? Do you mean hate or bad feelings?
Oh well, in the literature, like I think Anteros is the god of counter love or love returned. I don't know. Honestly, I'm no expert in this. This is just something I've kind of been focusing on when I like.
Yes, I would have to look for it because when in these dialogues and in the literature, at least in Aristotle and Eros and in Plato, Eros is always something that functions in a couple. That is, you love yourself, but the loving of yourself has to overcome the egoistical striving and be given to others. So the only possibility that I think that would match what you're going to say is the types of friendship and love that are discarded as egoistical loves. That means that are addressed to only oneself and for the pursuit of our own aims. And they don't build up a community, they don't build up friendship, but are, for example, love is, for example, for the sake of utility or the sake of self-appraisal. These are forms of love, maybe anti-eros love, that are despised and that are discarded by Plato and Aristotle.
Okay, thank you. Yeah,
I should dive more into it because, well, it is quite an interesting subject, but I'm not quite familiar with it.
Yeah.
With anti-eros.
Yeah. Here's Leon.
Thank you, Irene. I have a question which regards the differences in your very philosophical account of Eros and love and agape and philia. How does the philosophical account differ between considerations of mortals and divinities? I'm thinking of Narcissus and his transformation. I'm thinking of the transformation of gods in their dealings with mortals, Leda and the Swan, Ganymede, all those kind of things.
Quite an interesting question. Narcissus would be the example of egoistical love, as is love of oneself. And I have to correct myself. While these types of egoistical loves, of self-appraisal emotions, they are not at all discarded at all, but they have to be instrumental to the further forms of love, which are always reciprocal and which are given to friends or to other persons. So it would be only a stage of love, a primal stage, which has to do also with perhaps, self-appraisal emotions, but they are not really the full developed and forms of love that are the basis or are at the basis of virtue. That is, they are not, these types of love do not found or do not ground virtue. And for the love of God, that would be more worship than love in the sense of Plato and Aristotle. That is, it would be perhaps as in Husserl, there is worship and there is faith. It would be a kind of love which the person feels it's reciprocated to. I could perhaps match it to Husserl.
Right,
But I think that my answer is not complete. I have to think of it. Thank you very much.
we have another question here.
Thank you, Irene. My name is Adam. So thank you for your presentation. It was intimidating to listen to because I have a background in hard science. So you might have answered my question already, but I'm going to ask it anyway, right? So I've written it down. So I wonder how you are seeing the role of love in psychoanalysis in context of healing trauma, which often involves revisiting ugly pasts in the name of love. And somehow, if I understood you correctly, love is the basis of a harmonious world. So how is it that love allows the ugly to happen? So this taps into divine femininity. Some people call this like the whore of Babylon, this concept. I wonder if you have an opinion or maybe what do you think about this? Thank you.
Well, Aristotle is very clear about that. Aristotle would say that love is not enough. Love must be directed by bouleusis, it is a rational understanding of what is truly good. So love is not taken in isolation. It must be embedded in a rational justification of life and our actions. And what is interesting, and that's why love alone is not the basis of virtue. It must be accompanied by rational choices. And Aristotle is very interesting because while Plato leads us to the summit of the ascent and takes the absolute value of love and rationality and in the summit of beauty and of the good as a universal value. Aristotle is much more, I would say, tied to the ground, to the reality. He says the theory of the means of the middle, that your elections, your choices, and your decisions are relative to your own personality, to your own person. That is, they are relative to us. They are not absolute values. They have to be made compatible with other strivings and searches in life. So it is not, I would say, yes, of course, in the name of love, yes, many cruelties have been committed. It's the most common. Is something that we see each day. But the problem is that love alone does not suffice. Must be embedded in the search for the good, for happiness and for the good of all of the persons, not of my egoistic strivings, not the fulfillment of only my wishes and my intentions. And they have to also take into consideration feelings and the strivings of the other persons whom I address my love. So, I mean, love is not an absolute value, and therefore it must be embedded in a whole of rational decisions and of other feelings, and absolutely in the search for the good.
I think I agree with you generally, like about the contextualization of love, the definition of love as an essence or a particular form, but there's also this statement, God is love, right? From like the book of John, and it really rings true and becomes a general sort of saying. And so sometimes there is a sense, ancient and invented, that love is also this like all transcendental thing, like Plato's the good beyond being, or perhaps like shunyata or something like that is kind of love. I mean, maybe not between two physical bodies, it's a different sort of context, right? So the very romantic sense of love seeks to transcend all of its contextualizations and from essence to a sort of super essence, right? So I wonder if we break out of the confines of the classic definitions of love, which I think are also very important in not only giving us definition of love and giving us, a captive concept or essence of love. There is also that desire to transcend even beyond these things, right? And so that looms, that haunts behind, our concepts about an ethical sort of love and a contextualization of it. So I wonder what you think about that, about love in a totally otherworldly sense, perhaps ever present, like the unmarked state, or super present rather, maybe always already or something,
Yes, I think that there are different forms of love. When Husserl, for example, takes love in the sense of agape, that is an unconditional love for everyone. And before I am summoned to love someone, that is, as Levinas says, confronted with another phase, I have the obligation, I have the duty to love it. So love in this sense, it's not addressed to a particular person or to a particular community, but to humanity in general. And this type of love must be changed into a teleology, into which summit is the love of God. So what you're saying is quite interesting because it absolutizes love, but not love addressed to a particular person, but love addressed to the whole of humanity. So if I address love also in a loving faith to God, what is particular in Husserl at least is that love is not it takes not the sense of a Christian faith in love, which is unconditioned and absolute, but takes the form of a rational faith. And this is quite interesting that it's completely different to the Christian faith and unconditioned love, because Husserl takes this form of love as a possible justification or compensation of the irrationalities of life. He says, if I have to believe that the world is a harmonious one and that there is a world order and that everyone strives for eudaimonia, for happiness and for the good itself, I have to believe in God as the last warrant of this harmonious order. So faith with irrationalities, faith with cruelty, faith with anti-eros, I have to believe in God because it's the only warrant that I have left for the sake of harmonizing the whole world order. So in this sense, love takes super essence or an absolute value, takes the form of really something that permeates everything. And I would say then that it's an universal essence of everything and everyone.
All right. Thank you. I think that's enough time now. And let's thank Irene once again.
Thank you very much for your question. They give me very much to think about. Thank you very much.